Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about burnout, which we read about in the chapter for this week. My why. So when I think about burnout, it's actually something that I've heard kind of thrown around a lot these days. I think just given the pandemic, like everyone just had a rough go of things, and there's kind of that mentality of like just grind through it, just push through it, but it's pretty serious, right? Um, and something that we should take more into consideration and look toward like the root of it. It's not healthy to hold a bunch of stress. As well as the other thing in reading about it is job considerations, right? Like knowing yourself as a person and knowing which fields interest you and kind of having to make that determination of whether or not that actually would be appropriate for you, if it does lead to burnout. um, is it something that you're going to be able to balance in your life? So just thought it was interesting when I read about it in the book and thought I'd learn a bit more about it. So the news article is talking about burnout in the workplace. And so it's definitely like a worldly perspective, but like I said, we're hearing this term come up more and more. One of the things they mentioned was worry burnout. So they mentioned everything going on in the news, um, just getting people to a place where they're constantly worrying about something going wrong. Um, and they directly linked it to stress, but they kind of turned it into, in today's world, there's a lot of things to stress you out. So try not to be stressed. And here's ways to manage your stress and anxiety, because it kind of framed it as, well, you're going to have to go to work anyway. You don't have a choice in that. Um, So here's how to deal with it, right? As opposed to, different ways around it. They're kind of like, just you try to be better. So, anyways, it was definitely a news article, right? It's definitely a worldly perspective of this is our society and you deal with it. Um, but from the sociological perspective, I thought it was interesting. One of the quotes from the journal article that I read was, social workers can only provide adequate care for others if they first properly care for themselves. And then it gave a couple of suggestions for how to prevent burnout in a social work perspective. And I just think this is really interesting because a huge part of social work is giving your all for other people, right? And I just really like the importance of putting yourself as a priority first, because remembering that you really will not be as helpful or as um, good in your work if you are not in a good place yourself, right? And so if we want to help other people, we also need to make sure that we're in a good condition to do so, and that we don't drag both of us down together in the same time. So they gave a few tips on how to combat it. So I've just shared three. One is develop an anti-ritual. I thought that was interesting. It's talking about how when you're in so much routine, your brain just kind of gets used to it and it rewrites all the same loops. Um, and saying plan a day where you just do things differently. Either you wake up at a different time, or you eat different food, or you take a different way to work, just to kind of get you out of that robotic funk, to switch things up a little bit and to give your brain things to look forward to and to be excited about. Another one that they talked about, of course, is practicing self care. Self care is a broad term, but they're essentially just saying, yeah, make sure that when you are planning your to do list, you are including yourself in there. You can't do everything um, back to back. I think about like planners that I've had that have 30-minute increments. Like, realistically, I cannot write something on every one of those lines because it takes me time to walk somewhere. I need to eat, and just like you can't set stuff up without remembering to write in some time for yourself. And the tip that I thought was especially interesting is they even say change jobs. Like, look in the social work community, it's huge. Um, if you're really feeling bogged down and you're not at your best, maybe go as far as changing jobs, because you want to be as productive in your workplace as you can be. And if that includes having to switch scenes and change your job, then so be it. So I thought it was an interesting article of going over this. From the NASW, I took the term service, because I think there's a few ways to interpret this. So just the quote, it says social workers elevate service to others above self-interest. Social workers draw on their knowledge, values, and skills to help people in need and to address social problems. Social workers are encouraged to volunteer some portion of their professional skills with no expectation of significant financial return pro bono service. So if you think of it in terms of burnout, you can see in light of what the NASW, sorry, is saying. It's really easy to run yourself into the ground here. Um, but if we take self care and place it above and translate it to be something other than self interest, like you're not being selfish. And so, with all of this, that social workers are expected to do and to be, part of that is, in my mind, is you're expected to take care of yourself to prevent reaching a point of burnout or reaching a point where you can't go on any longer. Um, and so to me, preventing burnout is part of service towards people. But it's also on this flip side, really easy to see how social workers can feel run down given all that they're expected to be and do. So, comparison, the biggest difference that I notice is, and actually, it was pretty similar even between the two articles, um, but they essentially talk about it in terms of coping, right? Of do this, try this, instead of addressing the real issue. And so I think in my opinion, I think that it's always best to address the main issue of, okay, like what's causing burnout? If it is stress, is it a healthy amount of stress? Probably not, because you're getting to the point of burnout. Okay, what can we do about it? Right. But I do recognize that finding that long term solution and finding that route takes a lot of effort and a lot of energy that, and a lot of times people just aren't either willing or able to provide that. And so instead, we come up with these coping mechanisms, which are fine and which work. But in my opinion, it would be better if we address them. So, what I saw between the two articles is both of them gave us ways to cope. I thought that the sociological perspective gave a better way to cope, where it was more focused on treating yourself with kindness versus just do it and take a nap every once in a while. Because if we think about it, one thing that neither article addressed, there are going to be a lot of long-term effects of what happens if you get to the point beyond burnout, or what's that going to look like 5 years down the road, or what if, with a working situation, you're not in a place where you can retire. Things like that, that just I think people should take into consideration. And then, like I mentioned, there's different lists of ways to manage our stress before it turns into burnout. Um, and everyone has different ways that are going to work better for them. That's one thing that I saw different between the articles, but similar in that they both gave different ways to manage, but different in which suggestions they offered. But I thought both were good and both recognized burnout as a problem and something to definitely be aware of. Um, I do think it's kind of sad that, you know, in this day, we're just kind of like, it's a reality. um, but they did give some good ways to treat it and to manage it. But I think it would be great if we got towards the root of the issue. So, my question is, how should we distinguish between burnout and high stress situations in order to best protect one's health, mental health, etc.? Then my references.